Welcome to EDAB video number 6. Data analysis and business intelligence made easy with Excel power tools. Hey, I just want you to look at this picture. There's some raw data, and there's this zip arrow. Here's our useful information. And right in the middle is a magic wand. That's Power Query. Now, what makes Power Query so magic is that it can easily take bad data and convert it into a proper data set. Why is that so important? Because none of the data analysis tools work unless we have a proper data set. Now, Power Query can do so many things. And in fact, it's how we import data into Excel. It's how we clean and transform the data. And you're not going to believe it. We can load the data to an Excel worksheet, directly to a pivot table, or even into the big data model. That magic wand, and you can see those little golden sparkles. That is the perfect icon for Power Query's magic. Now, what do I mean by Power Query magic? If we have a text file and we need to import it and create this pivot table and pivot chart report, no problem. Power Query comes to the rescue. If we have this bad data set where for some reason we have product, date, and region all combined in a single cell, Power Query will have no problem converting it to a proper data set, and then we can create our pivot table report. If we have multiple text files that we got from a database and we need to combine or append them all into a single proper data set, Power Query makes it easy. If we need to load our data, guess what? We can load it to an Excel table and an Excel worksheet, directly to a pivot table, or if we have big data, we can even load it directly to the data model. Now, there's a bunch of different files you can download so you can follow along and do the homework problems. You'll download it as a zip, right-click, extract all to unzip it. Inside that zip folder, there's homework number 2. These are the 2 text files we'll use for example number 1. There's the start file. That's what you use to follow along with all the Power Query magic. Finished file, that's what it's like after the video's done. And there's the PDF notes with all the written information about Power Query. Now, here are the topics for our video. And be sure to look below each video. Now, this is Excel Basics 1. But below our video, if you look for that Show More button, you click, and there's a time hyperlink table of contents. If you like what you see, click that subscribe button and the bell icon. Now, what is Power Query? What does Power Query do? It imports data from external sources. Now, we can get external sources like text files, folders that contain multiple files, Excel workbooks, also Excel worksheets, SQL databases, and so much more. Almost any location that can hold data, Power Query can connect to. Now, we can clean data, like splitting data in a column into 3 columns. We can transform the data, like we're going to see combining multiple tables into one proper data set. And then we load the data after we imported, cleaned, and transformed to either the Excel worksheet, the pivot table cache, or even the Power Pivot data model. Now, we have to talk about where the Power Query ribbon tab is, because it's in a different place depending on what version you have. If you do not have Office 365, but you have Excel 2013 or 16, Power Query is in the Data ribbon tab in the Get and Transform group. If we want to go get external data, we use New Query. If we're bringing data from the Excel sheet, we use From Table. These 2 ribbon tabs are for if we have Office 365. And the only difference is the color in the icon. If we want to go get external data, we use Get Data. If we want to bring data from an Excel sheet, we use From Table or Range. And in the Queries and Connection group, if we want a list of the queries in this workbook, we click Queries and Connection. In earlier versions, you had to click Show Queries. Not only that, but if you have Excel 2010 or 13, you can actually download Power Query, and it would be a whole separate tab. Now, this is all Excel. When we get to video number 10 and 11, we'll be using Power BI Desktop. And guess what? Power Query is so amazing. It's in Power BI Desktop too. It's in the External Data group in the Home ribbon tab. All right, in the Start file on the sheet, Example 1, an employment survey asked a sample of human resource executives what their employment plans were over the next 12 months. And the data we got was in a text file. This is the final pivot table and pivot chart report that we need. Power Query will be the magic that gets us from a text file into a pivot table and our report. Not only that, but next month when we get a new text file, we'll simply make a simple edit inside of Power Query and everything will update. Here's our March file, and if I open it up in Word, we can see it's a tab delimited file. The tab character is what separates the two field names and each item for each record. Now we need to point Power Query to this text file, and I've downloaded and unzipped my folder on the desktop. Over here in Excel, I'm on the sheet PT1. Now we go up to Data. Here is Power Query. Get Data is how we get external data. And there are many different data connectors. We can do it from an Excel workbook, text file. Later, we'll see this amazing folder option. You can connect to different databases, Azure, various online services, and lots of other connectors. We're going to do from file, from text, CSV. There it is. I've pointed Power Query. There's the full path. I click Import. In the second step right here, it wants to know what the delimiter is. Now, it almost always gets it right, but always check it, because occasionally it will not get it right. Now, we want to click Transform Data. Sometimes in different versions, it'll say Edit. We do not want to load. So I'm going to click Transform Data, and this will open up the Power Query Editor. In the title bar, we see it says Power Query Editor. This is a completely different window. We see a preview over here. The very first thing we want to do is come over and name our query. So I'm going to highlight, Text Survey Data Final Table, and Enter. Now down here are the applied steps. No matter what we do to clean or transform the data, every action we take will be listed here. Now very importantly, at the top of every query we make will be source. If we want to change the source, whether it's the text name or the location of a folder or whatever the source is, we can edit this. Either click the icon or double click. And there we can edit this. And later we'll come back and edit it. Click OK. But that's important because the location of a particular source can change, and it's easy to edit. Now, it added one step, change type, which means that it added a text data type to each column. But we don't need this because we have some transformation steps we need to take. So we can simply come to the applied steps list and use the red X. I'm going to click, and that removes it. Now, the field names or column headers, because they were text, Power Query didn't interpret them as field names. No problem. We come up to the upper left corner, and that little table icon, we click the drop down, and there it is. Used first row as headers. That immediately adds a step to applied steps, and it changes the type for us. But let's look up here. That icon ABC means text data type. For any column, you can click that icon, and there's our list of different data types. Now, these data types are important because they enforce what type of data goes into the column. And if you have a number, decimal number is when you want up to 15 digits. Currency up to 4 digits. Whole number, percentage, date, time, date, and time. Those are all numbers. If you don't have the correct data type on your column of raw data, when you try to go make a calculation in a pivot table, for example, your calculation might not work. For example, if I have numbers showing up as text, you are not going to get the sum calculation to work in a pivot table. Now, the data type we have, text, is fine. Escape. Also, over here on the left, if I open queries, this is a list of all of the queries we have in this Excel workbook in the Power Query Editor. Later, we'll see that we can get the list when we're over in the Excel sheet. But here in Power Query, that's where our queries are listed. Now we have our applied steps. We've named it. Now we're ready to load this. Home, close, drop down for close and load. If I simply click close and load, it defaults and loads it to an Excel sheet. I want to click the drop down, Load To. This gives us the full power of where to load it to. Click the Import Data dialog box. If you're in earlier versions, it says Load To, and Pivot Table and Pivot Chart are not available. There are ways to work around that, but in the most recent Import Data dialog box, it's polite. It lists, hey, we can send it to an Excel table. Pivot Table, that's the one we want. Pivot Chart, and only create connection. We use this when we load the data to the data model, and we'll see how to do that in a later video. All right, Pivot Table Report, I click OK. Now, very importantly, it opens up Queries and Connections. There's our query. This is where we look to see our list of queries in the Excel sheet. If it's not showing, then you have to go up to Data, Queries and Connections, Queries and Connections. Notice it says 180 rows. If you ever need to edit, double click, and that opens up the Power Query Editor. Close. Also, if you need to change the load location, right click, Load To. For example, we might want to change it from Pivot Table Cache to the Excel sheet. Also, over here we have our Pivot Table fields. I'm going to click and drag. Now we want our cross-tab pivot table, so I'm going to drag Employment Plan over the next 12 months down to rows. Type of company down to columns. Type of company down to values, it defaults to count. But what I really want is for each company variable, I want the actual totals compared to the column totals. For each company variable, I want to see the plan percentage, add employees, lay off employees, and no change. And do that for each company variable. So what do? Right click. Summarize values by, that's to change the aggregate calculation. But we want show values as. There's all sorts of amazing options, and the one we want, percent of column total. Click, and there we have our report. Now we need to create our visualization. Insert, over to Charts, drop down, Column. Very carefully with my Move cursor, I'm going to click and drag. Right click, hide all field buttons on chart. Select the legend, Control 1. And our Format Legends, I'm going to put the legend at the top. Green plus, I want to add data labels. Get rid of this chart junk, delete. I'm going to change the height, click and drag. And there's our finished report. We can see from our visualization that the private and public companies are going in opposite directions. Adding employees 50 to 30, laying off about 22 to about 39. Now, we built this solution. And next month, we get a new text file. There's our new April text file. And notice we were smart. We put it in the same location. Now, there's a bunch of ways we can deal with this. But I'm going to show you two ways. The first is if we want to keep this as a historical record, then I want to keep this and create a new query. So I'm going to come over to Queries and Connections, right-click, Duplicate. And I'm going to leave that name there with a 2 to indicate that this is our second text file. Now, wait a second. If I click Load To, it'll load March. So I'm going to come to Source, click, and the April file is in the same location. So I simply type April, click OK. Now, this is a new query, so I have to come up and redo Load To. Load To. I want it as a pivot table report, click OK. And just like that, I have it on a new sheet. Uh-oh, these are terrible names. I'm going to double click and call this Pivot Table Report 1 and enter. Pivot Table Report 2. Now, last video, we learned how to create pivot table styles and templates. If we had those here, it would be a few clicks, and we create our new report based on this new query. Now, we have two queries in our query panes. Watch what happens when I single click. It jumps me over to that query output, so I can jump back and forth between queries. Now, if we didn't need this as a historical record, and we have this perfect report built, watch this. We can edit this and change the file name. So I'm going to double click to open up Power Query Editor. Step 1, I either click the gear icon or I double click. And right up here, I'm going to change this to April. Click OK. Now, this is already loaded, so I simply click Close and Load, and our whole report updates with the latest data. So in this first example, we saw how to use Power Query to connect to a single file. Now let's scroll over and we want to look at our next example, example 2. In this Power Query example, our data comes from an Excel sheet. And look at this, product, date, and region all in a single cell. So what we'll do is we will import it into Power Query, clean it, load it to a pivot table cache, and this is the report we want. Now the first thing we need to do is convert this to an Excel table, because we can't bring data from an Excel sheet into Power Query unless it's an Excel table. So we use our keyboard, Control-T, click OK. Go up to Table Tools, Design, Properties. And we're going to call this Start Bad Data and Enter. Now with the cell selected, we go up to Data, Power Query, and there it is, From Table or Range. Here's the Power Query editor. The first thing we do is name our query. I called it Sales, Proper Data Set, and Enter. There's our source. Change type. I'm going to X this out. We'll add our own data types later. We select the column, and our goal is to split by a delimiter. Up in the Home ribbon tab, there's a big button for split. We can also right-click the column header and point to split by delimiter. From the drop-down, we want to select Custom. In the text box, space, / space. We have 3 characters that define our delimiter. We could do it at leftmost, rightmost. We want it at each occurrence. When I click OK, I have 1, 2, 3 columns. It added a step right here, and it added change type. We got to check to make sure we have the correct data type. ABC is text. That's date, text. And that ABC 1, 2, 3 means there's no data type. Now I'm going to make a mistake here. I'm going to change this to text just to show you that if we have the wrong data type, it causes trouble later. It'll be no problem because we can come back and edit in Power Query at any point in the process. Now we need to name each column. So I double-click, call it Product, and Enter. Double-click, Date, and Enter. Region, Enter. Sales, and Enter. Now we have our transformed data set. We have all the right, except for this one, data types. We have our steps, our name. Now we can load. Close and load to. And this time I want to illustrate loading it as an Excel table. Existing worksheet. Click the Collapse button. We'll put it in D14. Click Uncollapse. Click OK. Now we can see our query here, 365 rows. And this is the output from this query. Now this is different than our first example where we loaded the Power Query output directly to a pivot table cache. Now let's see what happens when we build a pivot table. Click in a single cell, Alt and V, and we're going to put this in I14. Click OK. Now we want to group by month, so I'm going to drag date down to rows. Immediately I'm going to drag rows off. I want product down below months. Right-click, expand, expand entire, region down to columns. And when we drag sales down to values, it defaults to count because this column is text. OK, so we forgot. Now we go back to our query. We can double-click or you can right-click Edit. And now we're going to edit our query. Click the ABC data type icon, and we're going to add data type currency. It adds the step. Now when we close and load, it will update the Excel table, which is our Power Query output. So this is working. Why isn't this working? Well, of course, because the count function was used. So right-click, summarize values by, and change it to sum. Zeros? Why is it 0? When we use Power Query and we do 2 steps, load it to the Excel sheet, and then build a pivot table. Power Query is connected to this output, but the pivot table is connected to this Excel table. And when we Alt and V to create this, it actually copies the data and stores it in the pivot table cache. So this is different than our first example where we loaded the output directly to the pivot table. In that case, as soon as the query updates, the pivot table updates. So when we load the Power Query output to the Excel sheet, we have to refresh in 2 steps. We've already refreshed the query, so now we come over to the pivot table, right-click Refresh. And now we get our sum. All right, I added a little number formatting and a label. Let's go get our new data. I'm going to use the keyboard Control asterisk on the number pad or Control Shift 8 to highlight all of the new records. Control C to copy, scroll over, click in one cell, Control down arrow to jump down to the bottom, and directly below our bad data set, Control V. Now this table object has all the new records. Control up arrow, we come over to Power Query, right click, refresh. And look at that, it transformed and loaded to the Excel sheet in the Excel table 481 rows. Now we come over to our pivot table, right click, refresh. And that is pretty amazing. Bad data into a proper data set into our pivot table report. All right, now we have one more amazing Power Query example. Let's go over to example 3. For example 3, we need to look inside this folder. When we look inside, there's a Start folder. Inside here, we have April and May. When I double-click and open up April text, product, date, region, and sales. Now here is probably one of the more amazing things Power Query can do. If I point Power Query to that Start folder, and I say Import as a folder, it will import every single file that it finds inside of the Start. Then, because these are text files, we can click the Combine button, and it will combine all of them one on top of each other, known as the append operation. Now, this is particularly convenient because we may build a reporting solution, and then later we get subsequent months. All we have to do is put them in this folder, click Refresh, and everything updates. Over on the sheet example 3, we go up to Data, Power Query, Get Data, From File, and there it is, From Folder. Click. We need a folder path. Click Browse. We want to navigate to our Start folder. When we point Power Query to that folder, it will import everything in that folder. Click OK. Click OK. Click Transform Data. We want to name this Monthly Text Sales Proper Data Set and Enter. Now, because we're importing files from a folder, we can see right here we have .txt. But what if we had other file types that we didn't want to import? Well, we can use a filter to filter and only allow .txt. But here's the thing. Power Query is case sensitive. So if we had capital TXT and we built a filter, it might not import it. So I come to Extensions, right-click, Transform, lowercase. That's because if we had capital TXT as a file extension, it might not import. But by converting everything to lowercase, I'll always get all of the TXTs. Now I click the filter drop-down, Text Filters, equals, and I only want to import .txt. Click OK. We do not need any columns except for the content column. So right-click, Remove Other Columns. If I click off to the side, not on the green word binary, but off to the side, I could see there's exactly one text file for each row. Now we're going to click the Combine button, and it's going to ask us, what is the delimiter? It's tab. I click OK. And when I click OK, it's going to create a bunch of queries over here on the left. Now, technically, what it did is it took a sample file, then it built some code, then it built a custom function. Over here, it invoked that custom function right there and did a number of other steps, including changing the data types. Now, I'm going to collapse this. That was all done automatically for us. This is our current query we're working on. After I verify that the names of the fields and the data types are correct, I can load. I'm going to change this data type to currency. Now it's asking us, do you want to replace? Because the automatic steps already added whole number. I want to replace that. So I say replace current. And now we're ready to load. Now this time, I'm just going to click the button because I'm very clear. I want the default. I want to load this to a new Excel worksheet. So I click the button. And there it is. I'm going to double click and call this All Text Files and Enter. Now here's our query right here. And this is the same data in a different form than our previous example. So we get exactly 365 rows. Now, we're not going to build a pivot table, but I want to go over to that folder, drag 2 new text files into the folder, and when we refresh, our data here will completely incorporate all of those text files into a single table. Now, I'm going to select June and July using the Shift key, Control-C, double-click Start, Control-V. Power Query is pointing to that Start folder. So now when we refresh, it will transform and append all of these tables into a single table. We can right-click Refresh the table, right-click Refresh here, or we can simply click Refresh. And look at that, 481 rows. Now I want to double-click and open this and go look. Now I can go look at any one of these previous steps. And if I click on Source, look at that. There's all 4 files. Now I'm going to close. All right, that was an epic introduction to Power Query. And we will get to use Power Query again later in the class. Now don't forget there's 2 homework problems for you to practice and have fun with. In this video, we saw how to take multiple text files, append them into a single table. We saw how to go from bad data to a proper data set to a pivot table report. And we started it off by connecting to a text file and building a pivot table report. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come, including next video, number 7. We'll see how to use the VLOOKUP function to build a spreadsheet data model. All right, we'll see you next EDAB video.